Bluebird is flying south. That was the text message that flashed across my screen. They were 5 simple words, but they made the blood freeze in my veins. For 11 years, my family never once cared about what I actually did for a living. They thought I was just their incompetent daughter struggling with an unstable job, fixing laptops for minimum wage. They had no idea who I really was, until the day my grandmother sent me her secret distress signal. I am Zoya, 33 years old, and before I tell you what happened when I kicked open the doors of my grandmother's estate, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth. I slammed my laptop shut, ignoring the encrypted forensic audit glowing on my screen, grabbed my keys and sprinted to my car. Big Mama Ruby and I had established that code phrase 5 years ago. It meant she was being forced into something against her will and needed immediate extraction. My tires screeched against the pavement as I raced toward the affluent suburbs of Atlanta. My family had always been obsessed with appearances, desperately clinging to their status in the elite Black high society circles, hosting lavish events and pretending we were modern royalty. When I threw open the heavy oak double doors of Ruby's sprawling estate, the scene in the foyer made me sick to my stomach. Preston, my arrogant white brother-in-law, who constantly paraded around in his tailored suits, was violently shoving my grandmother's antique jewelry into a cheap black trash bag. Right next to him was my older sister Serena, her perfectly pressed silk dress wrinkling as she physically pinned Big Mama Ruby into her wheelchair, trying to force a luxury fountain pen into the elderly woman's trembling hand. "Just sign the paper, Big Mama," Serena yelled, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "It is just standard power of attorney so we can move you into Shady Pines. They have a great memory care unit for people with dementia. You belong there now. Get your hands off her right now," I demanded, my voice cutting through the room like a whip as I stepped toward the glass coffee table. Serena jumped back, dropping the pen, but Preston just smirked and pushed his designer glasses up the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with that familiar condescending glare he always reserved for anyone he deemed beneath his tax bracket. "Well, look who decided to show up," Preston sneered, stepping squarely in my path. "Did the family's little IT girl finally leave her basement? Are you taking a break from installing software to grace us with your presence?" He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me, a tactic he frequently used to assert his authority over the women in this family. "Listen to me, Zoya. We are dealing with complicated adult wealth management right now. I am a licensed financial advisor, and I am taking over the trust to protect this estate. You just go back to fixing broken routers. I will give you a crisp $100 bill so you can buy yourself a pizza tonight, okay?" I did not even blink at his thinly veiled insults. I looked past his pale, smug face directly at Big Mama Ruby. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her eyes sharp, clear, and completely devoid of any dementia. She had been faking her decline to see exactly how far their greed would go, and they had walked right into the trap. "Wealth management." I laughed coldly, snatching the power of attorney document from the table and ripping it straight down the middle before tossing the shreds into the air. "Are you out of your mind?" Serena screamed, her face contorting with absolute rage. "Preston is trying to save this family from ruin. Grandma is spending money like a lunatic, and he is a senior wealth manager. You are nothing but a college dropout who plays with computers. What gives you the right to walk into a high society house and ruin everything?" "The right?" I asked, calmly taking a slow sip from a glass of iced tea resting on the console table. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen twice. "Preston, do you want to tell my sister why your precious Tesla Model X parked in the driveway has been completely disabled for the last 20 minutes? Preston froze, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of pure confusion. "What are you talking about? How do you know my car is dead?" "Because I am not a glorified IT desk worker, Preston," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. "I am the CEO of Vanguard Cyber Intelligence. My firm handles the security audits and fraud detection for the exact offshore banks you use. And exactly 30 minutes ago, I personally initiated a total lockdown on every single one of your financial assets." Preston's face turned ash white. He frantically pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking as he stared at the barrage of red alert notifications filling his screen. "You are bluffing," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You are just a bitter, jealous nobody. You do not have that kind of power. I have enough power to see the $2 million you secretly transferred out of Big Mama Ruby's retirement fund." I fired back, pulling a thick stack of printed bank statements from my bag and slamming them onto the glass table. "You funneled her money into a shell company in the Caymans to cover your illegal sports gambling debts. Serena, that diamond necklace you are wearing was bought with money stolen directly from your own grandmother's blood, sweat, and tears." Serena stumbled backward, looking at her husband in absolute horror. Preston was hyperventilating, now the reality of his exposure crashing down on him. His perfect facade shattered, completely replaced by the desperate rage of a man who realized his entire privileged existence was evaporating before his eyes. He realized that the woman he had belittled for over a decade was actually the architect of his total downfall. But instead of apologizing, his entitlement flared into violent panic. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You have gone too far this time, you delusional freak," Preston shouted, spit flying from his lips as he frantically dialed a number on his phone. "I am calling the police. I am having you arrested for trespassing, corporate espionage, and harassment. You are going to rot in a jail cell, and I am going to take every last dime this family has." "Call them," I challenged, crossing my arms over my chest and staring him down with absolute certainty. "Please, Preston, call the police right now. Dial the number on your locked phone. Because the moment law enforcement walks through those heavy oak doors, I am handing them a beautifully organized, color-coded binder that documents every single wire fraud felony you have committed across state and international lines over the past 3 years. Do you really want to explain to the federal authorities why $2 million of a black woman's hard-earned cosmetic fortune was quietly funneled through a bakery in Chicago to pay off a notorious sports betting syndicate?" Preston lowered his phone slowly, his thumb hovering uselessly over the dark screen. His chest heaved up and down as he struggled to control his erratic breathing. The tailored fabric of his expensive suit seemed to suddenly hang off him like a cheap Halloween costume. He looked frantically at Serena, who was currently pressing her back against the grand staircase, her trembling hands covering her mouth in total shock. She clearly knew her husband was struggling with gambling, but she had absolutely no idea he was funding their extravagant lifestyle by robbing her own grandmother blind right under her nose. "You cannot prove any of this nonsense," Preston hissed, though his voice lacked any real conviction or power. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and took 2 aggressive steps toward me, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. "You are just a bitter, angry black woman trying to tear down a successful man because you could never make it in the real corporate world. You think you are so incredibly smart with your little computer tricks, but you do not understand how real wealth operates in this country. People like me build economies from the ground up. People like you just complain about them on the internet." He leaned down, his face just inches from mine, his breath smelling strongly of stale coffee and mints. "I am a senior partner at my firm. I play golf with respected judges, local politicians, and the chief of police. Who do you honestly think they are going to believe when they arrive? A highly respected wealth manager with a pristine pedigree, or a loud, disrespectful dropout who broke into my house to throw a massive temper tantrum? I will bury you so deep in legal fees you will be paying me back for the rest of your miserable, worthless life." I did not flinch at all. I did not step back even a single inch. I just looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out a silver flash drive, holding it up deliberately between my thumb and index finger. "You are right about one thing, Preston," I said, my voice completely steady and calm. "I do not understand how your type of wealth operates because my firm specializes in completely dismantling it. This flash drive contains the complete transaction history of your secret offshore accounts. It shows exactly how you forged Big Mama Ruby's signature on 11 different occasions. It shows the exact IP address you used to authorize the illegal transfers, which, funny enough, traces directly back to your secure office terminal downtown. I already sent a secure copy of this entire file to the federal authorities and to the compliance board at your precious firm. You are not going to bury anyone today. You are going directly to federal prison. Preston's eyes darted wildly around the lavish room. The crushing reality of his situation was finally penetrating his thick skull. The daily microaggressions, the unearned arrogance, the desperate flexing of his social status could not save him from the digital paper trail I had meticulously constructed. He raised his hand high, his face twisting into a terrifying mask of pure malice, ready to physically strike me down. I braced myself firmly, fully prepared to take the hard hit, and enthusiastically add physical assault to his rapidly growing list of criminal charges. But the violent blow never came from him. The heavy front doors swung open with a loud creak, and the sharp clicking of designer heels echoed across the marble floor. My mother, Beatrice, stormed into the foyer. She was wearing a flawless emerald green dress, her neck draped in the signature pearls of her elite social club. She took one look at the scene of Preston sweating and enraged Serena, cowering by the stairs, and me holding the damning evidence, and she made her choice without a single moment of hesitation. Beatrice marched directly toward me. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask what Preston had done. She raised her hand and delivered a stinging slap across my cheek. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "How dare you come into this house and disrespect your brother-in-law?" Beatrice screamed, her eyes blazing with a familiar toxic fury. "You have always been jealous of Serena. You have always tried to ruin everything this family has built." I stood frozen, the side of my face burning from the impact. I tasted the metallic tang of blood on the inside of my cheek. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who was currently standing shoulder to shoulder with the man actively bankrupting her own mother. "Hi is stealing from Big Mama," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I wiped a small drop of blood from the corner of my mouth. "He took $2 million from her retirement fund. I have the absolute proof right here in my hand." I held out the flash drive, expecting her to see the truth, expecting her maternal instincts to override her obsession with social status. Instead, she aggressively swatted my hand away, sending the silver drive clattering loudly onto the marble floor. She glared at me with pure hatred, wrapping a protective arm around Preston's shoulder as if he were the victim. "I know exactly what he took," Beatrice yelled, her voice dripping with venom. "I authorized that transfer. Now leave your brother-in-law alone. He is the reason we have our social standing, and I will not let you destroy our reputation today." I turned my head to face my mother. The stinging heat on my cheek was nothing compared to the icy realization settling in my chest. She knew. She had known all along that this arrogant man was bleeding her own mother dry, and she had given him permission to do it. Beatrice stood tall before me, her chest heaving, her manicured hand hovering in the air. Serena rushed to our mother's side, nodding in agreement while clutching her silk dress. "You authorized him to steal $2 million from the woman who gave you absolutely everything," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed sharply in the cavernous marble foyer. "It is not stealing," Beatrice snapped, adjusting her pearl necklace with trembling fingers. "It is an investment in this family's future. You never understood how high society works. You never cared about our legacy. Preston comes from the Worthington family. Do you have any idea what that name means in this city? His pedigree is the only reason I sit at the head of the Jack and Jill Society Board. His connections are the reason we get invited to the governor's gala every year. We have to maintain a specific image. $2 million is a small price to pay to ensure Serena remains married to a man who elevates our status." "Status," I repeated, feeling absolutely disgusted by her words. "You willingly traded Big Mama Ruby's entire retirement fund for country club invitations and charity gala tickets." "I traded it for respect," Beatrice yelled, stepping closer. "Something you have never shown me. You have always been an embarrassment to this family, running around in dark hoodies, typing on computers, refusing to wear the dresses I bought you, refusing to network with the right people. I spent my adult life polishing the rough edges off this family, and you just want to drag us back into the dirt. Preston is doing exactly what needs to be done. He is moving your grandmother into a facility so we can take control of the cosmetic empire she is too old to manage. And let me make one thing crystal clear. I officially disowned you 5 years ago when you dropped out of law school, but I am making it permanent today. You will never see a single dime of Ruby's hair care fortune. I am the rightful heir, and I am cutting you out completely. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. Her face twisted with ugly greed. She was willing to sacrifice her mother and daughter just to keep a white man happy so she could brag to wealthy friends. It was genuinely pathetic. You really think he respects you? I asked quietly, reaching into my coat pocket. You really think this man views you as his equal? Preston suddenly lunged forward in a blind panic. Do not listen to her, Beatrice. She is trying to manipulate you. But I was much faster. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the house's Bluetooth surround sound system, and pressed play on a hidden audio file I extracted from Preston's cloud backup just an hour ago. It was a voicemail he accidentally recorded while talking to one of his underground bookies. Preston's voice boomed loudly through the hidden speakers in the ceiling, crisp and undeniably clear. Do not worry about the funds, Marty. The recorded voice of Preston laughed. I am handling the accounts for my mother-in-law. God, Beatrice is so stupid and desperate for my family name, she practically hands me the checkbook. These people are obsessed with trying to act like old money. It is pathetic. I am draining the old lady's accounts right now, and once I secure the company patents, I am going to bankrupt the whole lot of them. Serena is just as clueless. I will leave these ghetto wannabes with nothing by Christmas. The recording ended with a harsh click. The silence that followed was suffocating. The crude racist undertones and the blatant disrespect hung in the air like a thick, toxic cloud. I watched my mother's face, carefully expecting the grand illusion to shatter. I expected her to turn around and slap Preston the exact same way she just slapped me. I expected Serena to scream and throw her diamond wedding ring at his face. But Beatrice just blinked rapidly. She shook her head, her hands fluttering nervously around her pearls. That is an AI deepfake, Beatrice stammered, looking desperately at Preston. That is just one of your malicious computer tricks, Zoya. Preston would never say those horrible things. He loves this family. Serena grabbed Preston's arm tightly, thick tears streaming down her face. Tell her it is a fake recording, Preston. Tell her. Instead of panicking or denying it, Preston's demeanor completely shifted. The nervous sweating stopped. The fear evaporated from his pale eyes. He looked at Beatrice's pathetic denial, and a slow, wicked smile spread across his face. He began to laugh. It was a dark, guttural sound that echoed through the grand foyer. He reached down to the marble floor, picked up the printed bank statements I brought, and slowly ripped them into tiny pieces, letting the paper confetti fall casually over his expensive leather shoes. She really is that stupid. Preston chuckled darkly, adjusting his tailored suit jacket and looking directly into my eyes. But you know what, Zoya? It does not matter if the recording is real. It does not matter if you freeze my accounts. You are too late, IT girl. He stepped right past Beatrice, who was still trembling in deep denial, and locked his cold eyes onto mine. I did not just take the $2 million. Preston whispered, his arrogant smile widening into a triumphant grin. I legally transferred the core patent of Ruby's haircare empire into my private shell company this morning. I own the formula, I own the brand, I own it all now. Preston spun on his heels, stepping right over the shredded bank statements scattered across the marble floor, and marched purposefully toward the heavy front doors. Serena hurried after him like an obedient shadow, throwing one last victorious smirk over her shoulder. My mother lingered for only a fraction of a second, giving me a look of absolute disgust, before pulling her expensive designer coat tightly around her shoulders. She slammed the heavy oak door behind them, leaving me completely alone in the silent foyer with Big Mama Ruby. I did not shed a single tear. I did not fall to my knees in despair. I did not scream or beg them to stay. I simply turned to my grandmother, who was still sitting quietly in her wheelchair. A slow, deeply knowing smile spread across her beautiful lined face. She nodded at me exactly once. It was finally time to go to war. I pulled my encrypted smartphone from my coat pocket and dialed the secure emergency line for my executive team at Vanguard Cyber Intelligence. I ordered my lead forensic accountant and my top corporate litigator to meet me at the downtown financial district in exactly 45 minutes. I told them I needed federal corporate auditors, and I needed them completely ready to breach a highly secure private building. I kissed Ruby gently on the forehead, promising her that absolutely everything she had, painstakingly built over the last 40 years, was completely safe. Then I walked confidently out to my car. I started the engine, my mind racing with precision. This was the moment I had meticulously planned for. Every digital trap I set was about to spring shut on them. The drive into the busy city was a blur of cold, calculated strategy. Preston truly thought he had outsmarted a black woman he viewed as nothing more than a lowly tech support worker. He honestly believed his white male privilege and his expensive Ivy League degree made him completely invincible. He was about to learn a very painful lesson. He was about to learn that true power does not announce itself with loud temper tantrums or flashy designer suits. True power moves in complete, absolute silence until it is the exact right moment to strike a fatal blow. I pulled my vehicle up to the towering glass skyscraper that proudly housed Preston's elite wealth management firm. My team was already waiting for me in the grand lobby. They were 5 men and women dressed in sharp, immaculate black suits, carrying thick leather briefcases filled with federal warrants and immediate audit demands. We completely bypassed the panicked receptionist at the front desk, who desperately tried to call for building security. I simply swiped my encrypted master access card, which my company frequently used for corporate security testing, to instantly unlock the private executive elevator. We rode up to the 50th floor in total unwavering silence. When the polished metal elevator doors finally slid open, I could hear Preston's booming, arrogant voice echoing loudly down the pristine corporate hallway. I walked purposefully toward the massive frosted glass doors of the primary boardroom. Without hesitating for a single second, I raised my foot and kicked the heavy doors wide open. They slammed violently against the surrounding walls with a thunderous crash that literally shook the entire room. The large boardroom went dead silent. Preston was standing proudly at the head of a long mahogany table, holding a bright red laser pointer. Around him sat a dozen wealthy older white investors, all dressed in incredibly expensive tailored suits, holding their glossy financial portfolios. Serena was sitting comfortably in the corner of the room, wearing a smug, celebratory grin, fully ready to watch her husband liquidate her own grandmother's entire cosmetic legacy for a massive personal profit. Preston dropped his laser pointer in absolute shock, his pale face suddenly contorting into a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. He slammed both of his hands down onto the polished wood table, rattling the crystal water glasses sitting in front of his wealthy clients. "What is the exact meaning of this massive interruption?" Preston roared, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at my face. "Security! Get in here immediately and remove this delusional dropout from the premises. She has absolutely no business being in this private, highly secure building." 2 large, muscular security guards rushed hastily into the room from the side door, reaching aggressively for my arms. But my lead attorney immediately stepped forward, slapping a thick federally mandated injunction directly onto Preston's chest, forcing the guards to stop dead in their tracks. I ignored the confused security personnel entirely. I reached deep into my pocket, pulled out a small, highly modified remote control, and pressed a single decisive button. Preston's colorful financial presentation instantly vanished from the massive projector screen hanging on the wall behind him. In its place, a highly classified legal document appeared in bright, undeniable black and white letters. The large room quickly filled with confused, angry murmurs from the wealthy investors. Several older board members shifted uncomfortably in their premium leather chairs, exchanging deeply concerned whispers as they frantically adjusted their reading glasses to examine the harsh digital evidence displayed before them. The grand illusion of Preston's unbeatable financial genius was beginning to completely fracture right in front of their very eyes. I walked very slowly and very deliberately to the very front of the room, looking briefly at the murmuring crowd, and then stared directly into Preston's terrified, wide-open eyes. "You really should have actually read the fine print before you tried to rob a brilliant black woman, Preston." I said, my voice echoing clearly and powerfully through the suddenly silent boardroom, commanding the absolute attention of every single person present in the entire corporate space right now. That incredibly valuable core patent you transferred to your private shell company early this morning, it is completely entirely worthless. You just unknowingly stole a completely legally planted decoy. The entire room erupted into total chaos. The wealthy investors jumped out of their leather chairs, shouting angry questions and demanding immediate answers from the man who had just promised them the world. Preston stood frozen at the head of the mahogany table, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a steep cliff and was desperately waiting to hit the rigid ground below. The bright red laser pointer slipped from his trembling fingers and rolled off the table, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. "You are lying." Preston choked out, his voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant swagger. "I checked the corporate registry myself. I verified the serial numbers on the cosmetic formulas. My legal team authorized the asset transfer. It is a legally binding contract." I walked slowly down the length of the boardroom, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. "Your legal team verified a shadow corporation," I explained, projecting my voice so every panicked investor could hear exactly how incompetent their wealth manager truly was. "Big Mama Ruby and I knew you were coming for her empire 10 years ago. The moment you married my sister, Ruby saw the greed hiding behind your tailored suits and your elite country club memberships. So we set a trap. We quietly transferred the real billion-dollar patent for her signature haircare formula to an anonymous holding company called Vanguard Holdings. I am the sole owner of that holding company. The patent you stole this morning, the one you just proudly presented to this room full of federal investors as your own, is a completely useless chemical compound for industrial floor wax." The furious investors began shouting at Preston. One older man in a navy pinstripe suit threw his thick investment portfolio directly at Preston's chest. "You sold us fraudulent assets." The investor roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You asked us for $50 million in seed capital based on a stolen fake patent. Do you have any idea what you have done to our portfolios? You have exposed us to federal liability." Preston backed away, his hands raised defensively. He bumped into the digital projector screen, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "I can fix this," Preston pleaded, his pale eyes darting frantically around the room. "Just give me 24 hours to sort out the legal paperwork. It is a simple misunderstanding. She is a disgruntled family member trying to ruin my reputation." "He knows exactly what he has done," I said, stepping aside as the heavy boardroom doors swung open wider. The two muscular security guards who had tried to grab me earlier were now being pushed firmly against the wall outside. 4 agents wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bright yellow across the back marched confidently into the room. The lead agent, a tall, no-nonsense black woman with a stern expression, held up a federal warrant. "Preston Worthington," the lead agent announced, her voice booming with absolute authority over the boardroom chaos. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and federal securities violations." Preston actually tried to run. He shoved past a stunned investor and bolted toward the secondary exit near the caterer's prep station. He did not make it 3 steps. 2 federal agents tackled him hard against the polished mahogany table, knocking over crystal water pitchers and scattering expensive presentation folders everywhere. The loud click of cold steel handcuffs echoing through the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. "Get your hands off me!" Preston screamed, his face pressed aggressively against the wood grain. "Do you know who my family is? Do you know who you are dealing with? I am a Worthington. You cannot arrest me." The lead agent yanked him up by his collar without an ounce of sympathy. "The federal government does not care about your country club pedigree, Mr. Worthington," she replied coldly. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it before you add resisting arrest to your long list of federal charges." I stood there watching the arrogant man who had belittled me for over a decade finally get exactly what he deserved. Justice tasted incredibly sweet. But in my family, victory never lasted for more than a few minutes before a new layer of toxicity revealed itself. Just as the federal agents were dragging a sobbing, humiliated Preston toward the main exit, a high-pitched scream tore through the corporate hallway. Let go of my husband. Serena burst into the boardroom like a chaotic hurricane. Her designer makeup was severely smudged and her expensive silk dress was wrinkled from running. She shoved her way past the federal corporate auditors, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate, and vicious energy. She did not even look at Preston as he was being hauled away in handcuffs. Her furious, bloodshot eyes locked directly onto me. You think you have won, Serena shrieked, marching toward me with a manic, unhinged energy. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crumpled medical envelope from a prominent local hospital. You think you can just swoop in, ruin my marriage, and take control of Big Mama Ruby's billion-dollar holding company? You think you have the legal right to hide the family wealth in your little anonymous LLC? I stood my ground, maintaining my calm composure despite the raging storm in front of me. I have every legal right, Serena. I built the holding company. I protected the assets while you and your husband tried to rob our grandmother blind. Serena let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. She ripped the medical envelope open, pulled out a thick stack of stamped laboratory documents, and slammed them violently onto the mahogany table right in front of the federal agents and the stunned investors. You do not have the right to anything in this family, Serena screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. Because you are not even a blood relative. I found the old medical records hidden deep inside Mom's private safe this morning. You cannot own the family LLC because you are not a part of this family. You are adopted and I will destroy you. The thick stack of laboratory documents hit the mahogany table with a resounding smack. The heavy silence in the boardroom was replaced by the frantic murmurs of wealthy investors. Serena stood panting, her manicured finger pointing directly at my face. She looked like a cornered animal, hoping this stolen medical record would be her saving grace. The federal agents paused, loosening their grip on Preston, trying to process this explosion of domestic drama. Beatrice practically floated into the room behind her daughter, her green silk dress swishing loudly as she raised her chin with supreme arrogance. My mother saw the hesitation and immediately pounced on the opportunity. She marched toward the lead FBI agent, adjusting her signature pearls to project absolute authority. You heard my daughter, Beatrice demanded, her voice dripping with entitlement. This woman is a fraud. Zoya is not a blood relative of the Worthington family or the Ruby estate. She is a charity case we took in decades ago. She has spent the last year manipulating an elderly, demented woman to illegally siphon funds into that anonymous shell company she just bragged about. Do not arrest my son-in-law. Arrest her. She is the real criminal. Preston barked out a harsh laugh from where he was still pinned against the table. I told you she was a disgruntled nobody, he sneered, struggling against the cold steel handcuffs biting into his wrists. She fabricated all that banking data just to steal the patents. Arrest her now. I looked at the crumpled medical envelope on the table. It was a certified DNA test from a local clinic procured by secretly swiping my hairbrush and comparing it to a genetic sample from Serena. They had maliciously violated my privacy to erase my legal standing. But they failed to understand how corporate law worked. More importantly, they vastly underestimated the formidable woman they claimed was currently suffering from severe dementia. Is this true, ma'am? The lead federal agent asked, turning to me with a skeptical gaze. Are you not a legal heir to this massive estate? Before I could answer the agent, the frosted glass doors of the boardroom swung open one final time. A collective gasp rippled rapidly through the crowded room of wealthy investors. Big Mama Ruby wheeled herself deliberately into the room. She was not slumped over or trembling. She sat perfectly upright, dressed in a custom-tailored burgundy business suit, her silver hair styled flawlessly. She looked powerful, highly alert, and completely radiant. The frail, confused old woman they had tried to force into a cheap nursing home just an hour ago was entirely gone. In her place sat the fierce founder of a cosmetic empire. The only people committing fraud in this room are the ones currently screaming about bloodlines, Ruby announced. Her deep, resonant voice commanded absolute respect, echoing clearly across the large corporate space. She wheeled herself directly to the head of the mahogany table, stopping right beside me. Beatrice stumbled backward, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. Mother, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be resting. The doctor said your mind is completely gone. My mind is sharper than it has ever been, Beatrice. Ruby replied, fixing her daughter with an ice-cold glare. I simply allowed you and your greedy husband to believe I was fading so I could finally see your true colors. You did not disappoint me. You showed me exactly how willing you were to throw me into a locked medical facility just to maintain your country club status. Ruby turned her attention back to the lead federal agent, pulling a sealed legal folder from the side pocket of her wheelchair. My granddaughter Zoya is telling the absolute truth. 10 years ago, we legally transferred the core patents to her private holding firm. We did this because she is not just my adopted granddaughter. She is the sole biological daughter of Marcus Vance, my late business partner, and the brilliant chemical engineer who invented our signature hair care formula. The investors gasped loudly, scrambling to whisper to one another in utter disbelief. The Vanguard Holding Company was not a malicious trick. It was a legally binding, heavily documented inheritance. When Marcus died, his 50% ownership stake was placed into an impenetrable trust for Zoya. Ruby explained, her voice ringing with undeniable clarity. By our original corporate charter, she has been entitled to half of this empire since the day she was born. My adoption of her kept her safe under my roof. She does not need my DNA to own this company. She already owns half of it by birthright. Serena collapsed into a nearby leather chair, burying her face in her trembling hands as her entire world completely shattered. Preston stopped struggling against the federal agents, his eyes widening in total crushing defeat. He had tried to steal a massive company from the very person who legally owned the underlying chemistry. But Beatrice was not ready to surrender. Her desperate obsession with power and high social status made her completely blind to reality. She stepped forward aggressively, her face turning an ugly, blotchy shade of red as she prepared for a fight. This is completely unacceptable, Beatrice shrieked, slamming her fist against the table. I am your only biological child. I am the direct legitimate heir to your legacy. According to the company bylaws, as your biological daughter, I have full executive override rights on any patent transfers. I am voiding the Vanguard transfer right now. I am taking control of this boardroom. Ruby did not flinch. She looked at Beatrice with an expression of profound, devastating pity. She reached out and gently placed her hand over mine, drawing immense strength from our unbreakable bond. You cannot override anything, Beatrice. Ruby said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that carried a lifetime of deeply buried secrets. Because you are not my biological daughter. You were my late husband's affair baby. The words hung in the sterile air of the corporate boardroom like a physical executioner's blade. Beatrice froze completely, her manicured hand still pointing toward the polished mahogany table. The arrogant flush of red that had consumed her cheeks just moments ago drained away in an instant, leaving her skin a sickening ashen gray. Serena let out a sharp gasp from her leather chair, her eyes darting frantically between her mother and the powerful woman sitting in the wheelchair. Even the federal agents wrestling. Preston, toward the heavy glass doors, paused to witness the catastrophic implosion of a high society matriarch. That is a lie, Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was barely recognizable. My father was a highly respected judge. My mother was a socialite. You are my mother. You are just saying these horrible things to humiliate me in front of these people. Big Mama Ruby did not flinch, nor did she offer a single ounce of comfort. She simply stared at the woman she had raised, her expression stripped of maternal warmth. Your biological mother was a receptionist who blackmailed my husband for $500,000 before abandoning you at a fire station. Ruby stated, her voice slicing through the room. My husband begged me to take you in to avoid a public scandal that would have destroyed our business. I agreed because no child deserves to pay for the sins of a reckless man. I raised you in my home. I fed you. I clothed you. I paid for your private schools and lavish weddings. I gave you my last name. I gave you an identity that you used to construct this illusion of superiority. Beatrice began to shake uncontrollably. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching awkwardly on the thick carpet. She reached out blindly, grabbing the edge of the conference table to keep herself from collapsing. Her entire identity, built on the foundation of elite bloodlines and country club exclusivity, was completely shattering into a million jagged pieces. I tried to love you like my own. Ruby continued, her voice growing colder. But you inherited his cruel nature. The moment I brought little Zoya into our home after my business partner died, you treated her like garbage. You made sure she felt like an unwanted outsider, while you spoiled Serena with luxury. I watched you actively try to break Zoya's spirit for decades. And today, I watched you give your husband permission to drug me and throw me into a locked medical ward just so you could steal the money I earned with my own hands. You have no moral right to this family wealth. You have no legal right to my legacy. Shut up! Beatrice screamed, clapping both of her hands over her ears like a petulant toddler. Shut your mouth right now. I am a respected member of the Jack and Jill Society Board. I dine with mayors and senators. I am the rightful face of this entire empire. The wealthy investors remaining in the room began gathering their briefcases, muttering to one another in utter disgust as they rushed toward the exit. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with this catastrophic family meltdown. The federal agents dragged Preston out of the room, leaving only Zoya, Ruby, Serena, and a completely unhinged Beatrice standing in the massive corporate space. Beatrice dropped her hands from her ears, her eyes wide and wild with a desperate manic fury. She pointed a shaking finger at Ruby, then turned her vicious glare directly toward me. You think you have won because of some ancient secret? Beatrice yelled, spit flying from her lips as she marched toward my side of the table. You think you can just embarrass me in my own city and walk away with my fortune? I will destroy you both. I have the most powerful connections in this state. I know the editors of every major publication. I know the board members of every elite charity organization. I will tell them that you are a manipulative cybercriminal who hacked into a sick old woman's bank accounts to steal her company. You have no leverage left, Beatrice, I said calmly, stepping protectively in front of Ruby's wheelchair. Preston is going to federal prison. The patents are legally secured in my holding company. You have nothing. I have my reputation, Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly against the frosted glass walls. And I will use it to drag the Ruby brand through the absolute mud. I will launch a media campaign so devastating that distributors will drop your products overnight. And you, Zoya, I will personally ensure your little cyber firm is investigated for corporate espionage. I will call my friends at the country club right now. I will spend every last dime I have left to make sure your professional life is completely annihilated. You will never sign another client in this country again. I opened my mouth to respond, but a sharp buzzing sound interrupted me. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my encrypted corporate tablet. The screen was flashing with bright red emergency notifications. My lead crisis management director was calling me on the priority secure channel. I tapped the screen to answer, putting the call on speaker so the entire room could hear. Zoya, we have a massive problem. My director's voice blared through the tablet speaker, sounding panicked. A highly coordinated online smear campaign just launched against Vanguard Cyber Intelligence 10 minutes ago. Major financial news blogs are publishing anonymous fabricated reports claiming our security audits are a front for international data theft. Our company stock is taking a massive hit, and 3 of our top banking clients just called to threaten immediate contract termination. I looked up from the glowing screen. Beatrice was standing there with a triumphant smile spreading across her tear-stained face. She had already made the calls before she arrived at the mansion. She had preemptively paid her elite society friends to pull the trigger on my company. I stared at my mother's triumphant smile, feeling a profound sense of clarity wash over me. She actually believed a coordinated public relations attack could dismantle a federal-grade cyber intelligence firm. I calmly tapped a single button on my tablet, authorizing my crisis management team to deploy our automated countermeasure protocols. Within seconds, our servers traced the origin of the smear campaign directly back to the IP addresses of Beatrice's wealthy socialite friends. My legal team was already drafting massive defamation lawsuits that would freeze their assets by morning. I ended the call and looked at Beatrice, who was still practically vibrating with malicious joy. I told her to enjoy her fleeting moment of victory because I would be seeing her at the annual charity gala that very evening. I left the corporate boardroom without looking back, knowing the real battle was just beginning. The Jack and Jill Society's Winter Gala, was the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta's high society calendar. It was a lavish invite-only event where the city's black elite gathered to flaunt their generational wealth and pretend they cared about philanthropy. When I arrived at the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, the atmosphere was suffocatingly pretentious. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over hundreds of guests dressed in custom tuxedos and designer evening gowns. I wore a tailored black velvet suit, walking past the bewildered check-in staff with absolute authority. I spotted Beatrice immediately. She was holding court near the towering champagne pyramid, laughing loudly with the very women she had paid to ruin my business earlier that afternoon. When she saw me walking across the plush carpet, her practiced smile vanished instantly. She marched toward me, her eyes darting nervously around the crowded room. She snapped her fingers, signaling two large security guards to flank her. She loudly declared that I was an uninvited trespasser who needed to be physically escorted off the premises immediately. The surrounding guests stopped their conversations, turning their heads to watch the drama unfold. Beatrice raised her voice, clearly intending to humiliate me in front of her prestigious peers. She called me a disgraced dropout who was desperately trying to crash a private event to beg for money. I did not argue with the approaching security guards. I simply raised my phone and executed the backdoor override code I had embedded into the hotel's audiovisual network 10 minutes before I walked through the front doors. The soft jazz music playing through the ballroom speakers abruptly cut off, replaced by a sharp, high-pitched feedback whine that made everyone wince. The massive digital screens flanking the main stage, which were supposed to be playing a heartwarming video about the society's charitable endeavors, suddenly went entirely black. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom as the screens flared back to life. Instead of a charity montage, highly detailed, undeniable bank statements were projected in bright glowing letters for every single elite donor to see. The documents clearly displayed the Society's primary charity fund account, alongside a direct transfer history leading straight into Beatrice's private checking account. I had successfully bypassed their firewall and found the ultimate truth. My mother had been systematically embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Children's Charity Fund for the past 4 years. The financial records on the giant screens were incredibly detailed and mathematically impossible to refute. They highlighted exact dates and precise amounts, showing exactly how Beatrice funneled stolen charity money directly to Serena and Preston to maintain their lavish lifestyle. There were obvious transactions for Serena's luxury car payments, Preston's country club membership fees, and the hefty down payment on their suburban mansion. Beatrice had literally robbed a charity meant for underprivileged youth just to fund the illusion of her daughter's perfect high society marriage. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, followed immediately by an explosion of furious outrage from the betrayed donors. The elite women who had been drinking champagne with Beatrice just moments ago physically backed away from her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. People started shouting, demanding that the police be called to the hotel immediately. Beatrice stood frozen in the center of the room, her face completely drained of blood, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Her precious reputation, the only thing she truly valued in this world, was completely annihilated in less than 60 seconds. She was instantly ostracized, transformed from a reigning queen into a disgraced criminal before my very eyes. But the profound toxicity of my family did not end with my mother's absolute ruin. Serena had been watching the giant screens with wide, panicked eyes from across the ballroom. She quickly realized the sinking ship was finally going under, and she needed an immediate lifeline to survive the incoming federal investigations. Her fake facade of loyalty completely vanished into thin air as the reality of severe consequences dawned on her. Serena forcefully shoved her way through the angry crowd and dramatically threw herself onto the carpet right in front of me. She burst into violent theatrical tears, tightly clutching the fabric of my velvet suit with shaking fingers. She loudly announced to the entire ballroom that she was officially divorcing Preston, effective immediately, claiming he was a monster who ruined her perfect life. She shrieked that her entire marriage was a complete sham and begged for sympathy from the horrified onlookers staring down at her pathetic display. She screamed that she was a helpless victim of his financial abuse and manipulation, swearing she had absolutely no idea where the money came from all these years. Serena looked up at me with desperate, calculating eyes and demanded that I forgive her past mistakes and pay for her luxury divorce lawyers immediately so she could escape his crushing debt before it was too late. I simply stared down at my hypocritical sister, completely disgusted by her bold attempt to exploit my newfound wealth to save herself. I stepped back, pulling the hem of my suit out of her desperate grasp. I told Serena that she had made her bed with Preston, and now she was going to have to lie in it. I did not owe her a single dime for her luxury divorce lawyers, especially after she had just spent the entire afternoon trying to strip away my inheritance and lock our grandmother in a psychiatric ward. Serena's fake tears instantly dried up when she realized the dramatic performance was not working. The pathetic victim routine vanished from her face, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. She stood up from the carpet, smoothed down her wrinkled designer dress, and stormed out of the ballroom without saying another word. I knew my sister better than anyone, and I knew her retreat was only temporary. She was simply regrouping to find another angle of attack. By noon the next day, Serena had completely changed her battle strategy. If she could not manipulate me in private, she would try to destroy me in the court of public opinion. My crisis management team alerted me to a rapidly trending video on social media. Serena had posted a highly edited, tearful live stream from the front seat of her luxury sports utility vehicle. She looked disheveled and devastated, playing the role of the abused, abandoned wife to absolute perfection. In the video, she sobbed hysterically to her thousands of followers, claiming she was desperately fleeing a violently toxic marriage. But the real venom was directed entirely at me. Serena told her audience that her newly minted billionaire sister was a cruel, heartless monster who was actively refusing to help her escape a dangerous domestic situation. She spun a tragic, elaborate tale of how she was completely destitute, begging for table scraps while I selfishly hoarded the family's massive cosmetic fortune. The internet, always hungry for a villain, immediately took the bait. The comment sections under her video were flooded with absolute vitriol directed at my company and my character. People called me a ruthless corporate sociopath who lacked basic human empathy. Public opinion was temporarily shifting against me, and Serena was basking in the sympathetic attention she had always craved. 2 days later, the security concierge at my downtown penthouse called my private line. Serena was waiting in the lobby, claiming she wanted to make a genuine apology and beg for my forgiveness in person. I told the security desk to send her up to the top floor. When the private elevator doors slid open, Serena stepped into my spacious living room looking like a beaten dog. She wore a simple beige sweater, her head bowed in mock submission. But I immediately noticed the slight, unnatural bulge in the front pocket of her designer handbag. The tiny green indicator light of an active recording device was barely visible through the expensive leather mesh. She was secretly wearing a wire. Serena had come to my home to bait me into saying something cold and callous on tape, hoping to leak the hidden audio to the press and completely destroy my professional reputation. She started her theatrical performance instantly, crying softly and asking why I hated her so much. She begged me to just give her a tiny fraction of the holding company funds so she could survive the upcoming legal battles. She wanted me to yell at her. She desperately needed me to look like the greedy, aggressive black woman the internet was currently accusing me of being. I did not raise my voice. I did not give her a single soundbite she could use to victimize herself. I walked over to my modern glass desk, picked up a thick manila folder, and dropped it right onto the coffee table in front of her. I told her to turn off the hidden microphone in her purse before she dug herself a deep legal hole she could never crawl out of. Serena froze, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she realized her little espionage trick had been spotted immediately. She slowly reached into her bag and clicked the recording device off, her fake tears disappearing instantly. I gestured toward the heavy folder on the table. Inside were high-resolution time-stamped photographs captured by a hidden camera I had installed in Big Mama Ruby's living room several months ago. The crisp images clearly showed Serena's hand physically guiding our grandmother's fingers over the fraudulent power of attorney documents. I also included the digital metadata tracing the creation of those forged medical directives directly back to Serena's personal laptop. She was not just an innocent bystander in Preston's extensive financial crimes. She was the primary architect of the elder abuse attempt. I looked into her terrified eyes and delivered my absolute final ultimatum. I told my sister that she had exactly two choices moving forward. She could continue playing the helpless victim on the internet post, her little secret recordings, and try to win the false sympathy of absolute strangers. But if she posted one more video or spoke my name to the press ever again, I would personally hand this undeniable forgery evidence directly to the district attorney. I reminded her that forging medical documents to commit elder abuse carried a mandatory federal prison sentence, and unlike Preston, she did not have a wealthy family name to hide behind. Serena stared at the photographs, her hands shaking violently as she realized she was completely trapped by her own malicious actions. The digital smear campaign she thought would save her had just become the very thing that would guarantee her total destruction. If she wanted to stay out of a jail cell, she would have to publicly retract every single lie she had told about me and delete her social media accounts permanently. She had walked into my home hoping to record my downfall, but she was leaving with the horrifying realization that her freedom now rested entirely in my hands. The heavy wooden door of my penthouse clicked shut, sealing Serena out in the cold hallway with her shattered illusions. I did not waste a single second celebrating my victory over her pathetic espionage attempt. My mind was already racing toward the much larger, far more dangerous threat looming in the shadows. Across town, locked inside a sterile rented luxury apartment, Preston was currently pacing the hardwood floors like a trapped, desperate animal. He had managed to post a massive bail earlier that week, trading his tailored suits for a bulky, restrictive electronic ankle monitor strapped tightly around his right leg. He was watching the national news cycle absolutely tear his pristine, professional reputation into unrecognizable shreds. The federal prosecutors had just released a public statement confirming they possessed an airtight case against him for wire fraud and corporate espionage. Preston finally realized the crushing truth. His expensive Ivy League lawyers could not save him. His old money family name could not shield him from the undeniable digital evidence I had handed directly to the FBI. He was staring down the barrel of a 15-year federal prison sentence, and his fragile, arrogant ego simply could not handle the horrifying reality of being locked in a cage. Desperation is a powerful, blinding force. Preston walked into the kitchen, his hands shaking violently as he rummaged through a heavy metal toolbox left behind by the apartment maintenance crew. He pulled out a massive pair of industrial bolt cutters. With a sharp, agonizing grunt of exertion, he clamped the heavy steel blades directly over the thick plastic band of his federal tracking device and squeezed with all his might. The monitor snapped loudly, dropping to the kitchen floor like a dead weight. He was now officially a fugitive on the run. Preston did not bother packing a suitcase. He simply grabbed his encrypted laptop and sprinted towards the door. He had a secret ultimate fail-safe that he believed not even Vanguard cyber intelligence could ever possibly find. It was a deeply buried, highly classified account stationed in the Cayman Islands, completely detached from his primary wealth management firm and completely invisible to standard federal audits. It held exactly $5 million in untraceable liquid assets. Preston quickly connected to a secure virtual private network and transferred a massive sum to a shady aviation broker operating out of a small private airstrip on the outskirts of the city. He booked an immediate unlisted charter flight, heading straight for a remote non-extradition island in the Caribbean. He confidently believed he had just outsmarted everyone. He thought he could simply abandon his ruined marriage, leave Beatrice to face the brutal social fallout, and live out the rest of his days sipping expensive cocktails on a white sand beach while the federal government searched fruitlessly for his ghost. He smiled a sick, twisted smile as he hailed an anonymous rideshare vehicle to take him to the airstrip, absolutely certain he had won the final game. I was dead wrong. Inside the secure command center of Vanguard Cyber Intelligence, my primary surveillance monitors suddenly flared to life with blinding, flashing crimson warnings. The emergency klaxons echoed sharply across the glass-walled operations floor. My lead data analyst, a brilliant young woman who had been monitoring the digital perimeter of Preston's known associates, shouted across the room. She reported a massive unauthorized spike in encrypted offshore activity. I rushed over to the central command console, my fingers flying rapidly across the illuminated keyboard as I bypassed the commercial firewalls Preston thought were keeping him perfectly safe. My custom tracking algorithms immediately flagged the exact routing numbers he was trying to hide. We watched the digital footprint in real time as the $5 million moved from the Caymans to the aviation broker. Within 60 seconds, we intercepted the flight manifesto and the exact coordinates of the private airstrip. Preston was making a desperate, cowardly run for the border. My security team immediately advised me to simply call the federal authorities and let the FBI intercept him at the runway. It was the logical, safe move. But as I continued to dig deeper into the actual source code of the specific financial routing data Preston was currently utilizing, my blood ran completely cold. I urgently ordered my dedicated team to halt the pending federal notification, immediately knowing that law enforcement intervention would only accelerate the cartel's violent response. I stared intensely at the glowing green numbers cascading down my primary monitor, tracing the historical origin of that specific $5 million sum. This specific money did not actually come from my grandmother's personal retirement fund. It did not come from the charitable accounts my mother had been actively embezzling from. The digital signature attached to these specific funds matched a notorious network of shell companies currently being tracked by international intelligence agencies. Preston was not just a greedy, incredibly arrogant wealth manager who stole from his own family. He was an active money launderer for a ruthless, highly organized international crime syndicate. The $5 million he was desperately trying to use to buy his ultimate freedom was actually stolen cartel money. The horrifying reality of the situation crashed down on me with the weight of a freight train. If Preston successfully boarded that private plane and disappeared into the wind with their stolen funds, the cartel would not just write it off as a bad business deal. They would immediately seek brutal, uncompromising retaliation. They would hunt down his remaining family members to collect the massive blood debt he left behind. They would target Beatrice and Serena without a single second of hesitation. Despite all the horrible, unforgivable things my mother and sister had done to me, I could not let them be slaughtered by a violent crime syndicate because of Preston's absolute cowardice. I grabbed my tactical coat and bolted out of the command center, racing against the clock to stop a dead man walking. The engine of my car roared to life as I tore out of the underground parking garage, my tires gripping the wet asphalt. I pushed the vehicle to its absolute limit. My earpiece fed me live updates from my cyber intelligence team. They had successfully pinpointed the exact remote airstrip Preston was attempting to use for his cowardly escape. The heavy rain began to pour, pounding against my windshield, but I did not slow down. I knew that if that charter plane left the runway with the stolen cartel funds, Preston would inadvertently sign a violent death warrant for my entire family. Beatrice and Serena had treated me like garbage my entire life, but I was not going to let a ruthless international crime syndicate murder them. I smashed my foot on the brake pedal as I breached the rusty fence surrounding the private airfield. The tires slid through the thick mud. I parked my car sideways directly across the narrow access road. I stepped out into the pouring rain, my tactical coat shielding me from the biting wind. Just 50 yards away, sitting idle on the dark tarmac, was a sleek charter jet. The boarding stairs were lowered, and the harsh white lights of the cabin spilled out into the darkness. Standing right at the base of the stairs, clutching a heavy leather duffel bag to his chest, was Preston. He looked absolutely miserable. His tailored suit was soaked through, and his previously pristine hair was plastered flat against his pale forehead. He had broken his federal ankle monitor, committing yet another felony, all for a desperate chance to escape to an island. When Preston saw me walking steadily toward him through the torrential rain, his eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He dropped his heavy leather duffel bag onto the wet concrete. He knew exactly what my presence meant. He knew I had successfully tracked his secret offshore accounts, completely dismantling his ultimate escape plan. The arrogant wealth manager who had confidently mocked my intelligence just days ago was now completely backed into a corner, and a cornered animal is always incredibly dangerous. Preston frantically reached into the inside pocket of his soaked suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek, compact silver handgun, pointing the trembling barrel directly at my chest. The charter pilot who had been waiting at the top of the stairs took one look at the weapon and immediately retreated into the cabin, slamming the heavy aircraft door shut and locking it tight. Preston was entirely alone on the runway. "Stay exactly where you are, Zoya!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking wildly over the deafening sound of the rain. "Do not take another step toward me. I will shoot you. I swear to God I will pull this trigger. You have ruined my entire life. You took my reputation, you took my career, and you took my freedom. I am getting on this plane right now, and I am leaving this miserable country forever. You cannot stop me." I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I simply kept walking toward him, my posture projecting absolute unwavering authority. I stopped exactly 10 feet away, staring straight down the barrel of his shaking weapon. "You are not going anywhere, Preston," I said, my voice cutting through the stormy night with surgical precision. "And you are certainly not going to shoot me. You are a country club coward who only knows how to forge signatures and steal from elderly black women. You do not have the stomach for actual violence. But more importantly, you do not have the money to pay that pilot to fly you out of here." Preston barked out a harsh, hysterical laugh, keeping the weapon pointed at my heart. "You are completely delusional. I have $5 million sitting safely in a secure Cayman account. I already transferred the initial deposit to the aviation broker. My money is perfectly hidden." I slowly reached into my coat pocket. Preston flinched, tightening his grip on the gun, but I only pulled out my encrypted smartphone. I tapped the glowing screen once and held it up in the pouring rain so he could clearly see the bright digital display. "You really should have paid more attention when I told you what my company actually does," I explained calmly. "You thought you were laundering clean family money, but you were actually moving stolen funds for an international crime syndicate. Did you honestly think I would let you flee the country and leave the cartel to collect your massive blood debt from my mother and sister? I just bypassed the firewall on your secret offshore account. I legally routed the entire $5 million back to the original defrauded investors. Your secure Cayman account is currently sitting at exactly zero. You are completely broke, Preston. You have absolutely no money to run, and you have nowhere left to hide." Preston stared at the glowing screen of my phone, his pale eyes reading the catastrophic zero balance. The reality of his total destruction finally crashed down on him. The silver handgun slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the wet tarmac. He dropped to his knees in the puddles, burying his face in his hands as he began to sob uncontrollably. Before he could apologize, the deafening wail of police sirens pierced the night. Federal agents swarmed the tarmac, tackling him roughly to the concrete. The immediate threat was neutralized. However, peace never lasted in my family. The very next morning, a professional process server visited my office. I opened the heavy manila envelope and my blood ran cold. A mysterious, heavily funded corporate law firm was officially suing me on behalf of Beatrice. According to the lengthy filing, Beatrice's lawyers had just produced a newly discovered decades-old will, supposedly written by Ruby's late husband. This unexpected legal attack was brilliantly orchestrated to completely strip me of everything, setting the stage for war. I stared at the thick stack of legal documents spread across my glass desk, my mind processing the sheer audacity of this new attack. Before I could even summon my lead attorney, my private office phone buzzed with an incoming video call. It was Beatrice. I tapped the digital screen to accept the connection, fully expecting to see a broken, humiliated woman. Instead, my mother looked triumphant. She sat in a plush leather chair, sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass. Her signature pearls were back around her neck and a predatory smile stretched across her face. "Did you receive my little care package this morning, Zoya?" Beatrice asked, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You actually thought you could embarrass me in front of my entire society and just walk away with my family's legacy. You underestimated my resourcefulness. That document in your hands changes everything." I flipped through the heavy injunction, filing, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "A phantom will from your late father?" I asked, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. You really expect a federal judge to believe you just miraculously discovered a 30-year-old document hidden in an attic, the exact same week your son-in-law was arrested for wire fraud. It does not matter what the judge believes right now. Beatrice laughed, adjusting her posture to look more commanding on the camera. What matters is what the law dictates during an active probate dispute. That true will explicitly names me as the sole rightful heir to the entire cosmetic empire, superseding any of Ruby's recent transfers. It specifically includes the core chemical patents you tried to hide in your little holding company. My legal team just filed an emergency injunction. As of this exact moment, every single one of your corporate assets is frozen. Right on cue, my desktop monitor flashed with 3 consecutive security alerts. Vanguard Holdings was locked. My primary business accounts were temporarily suspended pending a rigorous judicial review. Beatrice had successfully trapped me in a legal gridlock. I am going to take everything from you, Zoya, Beatrice promised, leaning closer to the camera lens. I will throw Ruby into a state-run facility, and I will finally claim the wealth I deserve. See you in court. The screen went black as she abruptly ended the call. I did not panic. I simply hit the intercom button on my desk and immediately summoned my top intelligence directors into my office. We had a massive problem, but I knew Beatrice was nowhere near intelligent enough to coordinate an aggressive legal strike of this magnitude on her own. She was broke, socially exiled, and desperate. Elite corporate law firms required massive retainers, usually starting at $500,000, just to review a case like this. Someone else was heavily funding this brutal offensive. My team quickly set up a secure perimeter and began tearing into the digital footprint of the mysterious law firm representing my mother. It took us less than 3 hours to trace the hidden money trail through a complex maze of international shell companies. The financial data revealed a terrifying truth. Beatrice was not the mastermind behind this phantom will. She was just a willing, desperate puppet. The endless stream of legal funding traced directly back to Omnicorp Global, a massive, notoriously predatory pharmaceutical and cosmetic conglomerate. Omnicorp had been trying to launch a hostile takeover of Big Mama Ruby's brand for the last 15 years. Ruby had repeatedly rejected their lowball offers, refusing to let a soulless corporation swallow her authentic Black-owned business. When Preston failed to steal the patents for them, the conglomerate simply pivoted their strategy. They scooped up an exiled, furious Beatrice and handed her an army of ruthless corporate lawyers. Omnicorp knew that if Beatrice won the estate, she would sell the priceless patents to them for a quick, massive payout just to restore her lost social status. They are using a fabricated document to force a brutal war of attrition. My lead investigator explained, pointing to the scanned copy of the phantom will displayed on our main projector. They know the court process will drain our liquid capital, but there is a massive problem with this forgery, Zoya. It is too perfect. The forensic algorithms indicate the signature on this will is an exact pixel-perfect replica of your late father's actual signature. I frowned, stepping closer to the projector screen to examine the enlarged ink strokes. That is impossible. Ruby and I locked all of his original handwritten documents inside a secure physical vault 10 years ago. We digitized the archives and placed them on a highly restricted server that requires triple authentication to access. Nobody outside of this specific building can even view those files. Exactly, my investigator said, his voice dropping to a grim, serious tone. The conglomerate did not just forge this document from memory. They used a high-resolution scan of the original signature to create a perfect stamp. The only way Omnicorp's legal team could have possibly obtained that specific digital file is if someone gave it to them directly. A cold, unsettling realization washed over me. I immediately ordered my team to pull the encrypted access logs for the internal servers holding my family's private archives. We watched the green text scroll rapidly across the monitor, filtering millions of data points from the last 72 hours. The system finally stopped highlighting a single undeniable security breach that occurred at 2 o'clock in the morning just 3 days ago. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs as I read the employee identification number attached to the unauthorized download. The conglomerate had not hacked into my servers from the outside. The signature on the phantom will was deliberately procured by someone working inside my own cyber firm. Beatrice and Serena had somehow managed to plant a traitor right under my nose. There was a mole. The realization that a traitor was sitting inside my own highly secure building made my blood boil, but I did not let my anger blind my judgment. I instructed my intelligence directors to maintain absolute silence. If we initiated a sudden company-wide security sweep, the mole would instantly know we were onto them and destroy any remaining digital evidence linking them back to Beatrice and Serena. We needed to catch this corporate spy completely red-handed holding the digital smoking gun. I ordered my lead investigator to quietly isolate the exact server node where the security breach had occurred. I was not just going to fire this traitor. I was going to use them to completely dismantle Omnicorp's massive legal offensive from the inside out. I locked the doors to my executive suite and spent the next 4 hours personally coding a highly sophisticated digital trap. In the cybersecurity world, we call it a honeypot. It is an incredibly tempting fake piece of data designed specifically to lure unauthorized users into a heavily monitored environment. I created a massive encrypted dossier and labeled it with a title no corporate spy could ever possibly resist. I named it the Vanguard Master Legal Defense Strategy. Inside the file, I placed dozens of completely fabricated legal documents, fake bank routing numbers, and a bogus list of vulnerable character witnesses my defense team supposedly planned to call to the stand. I buried a microscopic tracking pixel deep inside the core code of the fake dossier. The moment anyone opened that specific file, my personal tablet would instantly record their keystrokes, capture their exact geographic location, and turn on the built-in camera of their terminal. I placed the honeypot file on a restricted secondary server and waited patiently in the dark. I did not have to wait very long. At exactly 11:45 that night, my tablet vibrated on my glass desk. The tracking pixel had been successfully activated. I watched the live video feed stream directly to my screen. The hidden terminal camera clearly illuminated the panicked, sweating face of Julian, a junior executive I had personally hired straight out of a prestigious tech academy just 2 years ago. Julian was sitting in his cubicle on the 12th floor, frantically downloading the fake defense strategy onto an untraceable external hard drive. I did not call building security. I walked down the silent, dimly lit stairwell to the 12th floor. My heels made absolutely no sound against the thick carpeting. Julian was so intensely focused on watching the download progress bar fill his screen that he did not even hear me enter his cubicle. I reached over his trembling shoulder and calmly pulled the external hard drive directly out of the USB port. Julian gasped loudly, spinning around in his ergonomic chair. When he saw me standing over him in the darkness, the remaining color completely drained from his youthful face. He tried to scramble backward, but he was pinned between his desk and the glass partition. Corporate espionage carries a mandatory 10-year federal prison sentence, Julian, I said, keeping my voice chillingly calm as I dropped the stolen hard drive into my blazer pocket. I gave you a career. I gave you equity in this firm. Why on earth are you risking your entire life to steal digital signatures for a disgraced socialite? Julian burst into desperate, pathetic tears, covering his face with his shaking hands. He confessed absolutely everything without me even having to raise my voice. He admitted that my sister Serena had approached him at a high-profile networking event 3 months ago. She knew he was drowning in massive student loan debt and desperately trying to maintain a flashy lifestyle he could not actually afford. Serena offered him $200,000 in untraceable cash to quietly slip a remote access Trojan into our archive servers. She paid him another $50,000 to procure the high-resolution scan of my late father's signature, so Omnicorp's ruthless lawyers could forge the phantom will. Julian begged me to let him resign, swearing he would disappear and never bother my company again. "You are not resigning, Julian," I replied, pulling up a chair and sitting directly across from his trembling figure. "And I am not calling the police to arrest you tonight. You are going to do exactly what I tell you to do, or I will personally hand your entire digital confession to the district attorney by morning. You are going to become my double agent." Julian nodded, frantically agreeing to every single term before I even finished speaking. For the next 6 weeks, we orchestrated a brilliant, flawless campaign of psychological warfare. I sat beside Julian at his terminal every single night, carefully crafting devastatingly inaccurate legal strategies. We fed Beatrice and the Omnicorp conglomerate a constant stream of highly believable, catastrophic misinformation. We made them firmly believe that my financial resources were completely drained. We leaked fake emails suggesting my top defense lawyers were preparing to quit the case due to lack of payment. We provided them with fabricated evidence indicating that Big Mama Ruby was mentally unfit to testify in a federal courtroom. Beatrice swallowed every single piece of poisoned bait without a shred of hesitation. The massive conglomerate grew incredibly overconfident, convinced they had successfully cornered me into an unwinnable position. They stopped preparing a rigorous legal defense and simply prepared for a total unopposed slaughter. The grueling weeks of preparation finally culminated in the highly anticipated trial date. The cold gray morning sky mirrored the intense, heavy atmosphere surrounding the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. I stood silently near the towering marble columns of the grand entrance, flanked by my exceptionally prepared legal team. We watched as a convoy of sleek black luxury sports utility vehicles pulled up to the curb. The heavy doors swung open and Beatrice stepped out onto the pavement. She looked exactly like a triumphant queen, returning to claim absolutely everything. She was dressed in a pristine white designer suit, her signature pearls gleaming brightly under the flashes of the local press cameras. She was flanked on all sides by Omnicorp's most expensive, ruthless corporate lawyers, carrying thick briefcases filled with forged documents and stolen lies. Serena walked closely behind her mother, wearing a smug, victorious smile. They proudly marched up the courthouse steps, completely ready to take away the massive empire I had built to protect my family's true legacy. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung shut, sealing us inside a massive chamber of polished wood and absolute silence. Judge Morrison, a stern man with zero tolerance for theatrics, slammed his wooden gavel to officially commence the trial. Omnicorp's lead attorney, a slick man with a sharp jawline and an incredibly expensive tailored suit, immediately took the center floor. He did not waste a second attempting to argue corporate bylaws or complex patent law. He went straight for a brutal, calculated character assassination. He paced in front of the jury box, aggressively painting me as a cold, manipulative outsider. He told the court that I was just a bitter adopted child who had spent decades secretly harboring deep resentment toward my wealthy biological relatives. He spun a horrifying, entirely fabricated narrative that I had used my advanced cyber intelligence skills to completely isolate an elderly grieving widow, tricking Big Mama Ruby into transferring billions of dollars into anonymous holding accounts. Then Beatrice took the witness stand. My mother delivered a flawless, Oscar-worthy performance. She wore a modest, conservative navy dress, deliberately leaving her flashy signature pearls at home to appear humble and deeply victimized. She clutched a lace handkerchief, dabbing delicately at her carefully produced tears. Beatrice sobbed openly into the microphone, telling the judge her late father explicitly promised her the cosmetic empire. She claimed he had written his true final wishes down on a piece of paper 30 years ago, hiding it away to protect her from my supposed malicious jealousy. She looked directly at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, begging the court to save her family's stolen legacy from a ruthless corporate sociopath. The performance was so incredibly convincing that I saw two court reporters actively wiping their own eyes in sympathy. Serena sat in the front row of the gallery, nodding along with a tragic, supportive expression. When Beatrice finally stepped down from the witness stand, the entire courtroom atmosphere heavily favored the prosecution. Omnicorp lawyers returned to their table with smug, victorious smiles, absolutely certain they had just won the hearts of the entire room. They expected my defense attorney to stand up and desperately try countering their emotional manipulation with witness testimonies about my good character. They expected a messy, dramatic screaming match about family loyalty and childhood trauma. They expected the wrong defense strategy. My lead attorney calmly stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked toward the judge bench without an ounce of panic. He did not call character witnesses. He did not ask to cross-examine Beatrice about her emotional state. Instead, he formally called Dr. Eris Thorne to the witness stand. Dr. Thorne was a highly respected, independent forensic ink specialist who frequently consulted for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The confident smirks on the Omnicorp legal team instantly vanished. Dr. Thorne took the oath and adjusted his glasses, carrying a thick, hardbound scientific report to the wooden podium. My attorney projected a high-resolution magnified image of the phantom will onto the massive evidence screen located in the center of the courtroom. He asked Dr. Thorne to specifically detail his independent chemical analysis of the ink used to sign my late father's name at the bottom of the 30-year-old document. The analysis is completely straightforward. Dr. Thorne stated, his voice ringing with absolute undeniable scientific authority. We extracted a microscopic sample of the black ink used on this specific document and subjected it to rigorous mass spectrometry. The chemical composition of this particular ink contains a highly specific patented synthetic binding agent known as polyresin compound delta. This specific chemical binder was developed to prevent document fading. My attorney paced slowly toward the jury box. And is it possible, Dr. Thorne, that my client's late father used a pen containing this specific synthetic compound to sign his last will and testament 30 years ago? It is absolutely physically impossible, Dr. Thorne replied, pointing directly at the massive chemical breakdown displayed on the screen. That specific synthetic binding agent did not exist 30 years ago. It was only patented by a commercial manufacturing company in Germany exactly 6 months ago. Therefore, the ink used to sign this supposedly ancient document was manufactured and purchased within the last half year. This signature was not written 30 years ago. It was written quite recently. A loud collective gasp erupted from the courtroom gallery. The undeniable scientific evidence shattered Beatrice's emotional narrative into a million tiny pieces. The judge leaned forward over his heavy wooden bench, his eyes narrowing sharply at the prosecution table. Beatrice turned completely pale, her hands gripping the edge of her wooden chair so tightly her knuckles turned bright white. Serena let out a sharp, panicked breath from the front row. They had paid Julian thousands of dollars to steal the digital signature, but they were too stupid to realize you cannot print a 30-year-old document using a modern, commercially purchased ink cartridge. I watched the lead Omnicorp lawyer closely. I expected him to panic, to sweat, or to desperately ask for an immediate recess. But he did not look defeated. He looked prepared. He smoothly stood up from his heavy chair, completely unbothered by the devastating forensic revelation. He confidently approached the judge bench, pulling a freshly stamped legal folder from his leather briefcase. "Objection, Your Honor," the lead lawyer announced, his voice projecting a sickeningly slick confidence. "The defense forensic analysis is entirely accurate, but it is also completely irrelevant to the legal standing of this case. My client never claimed this specific piece of paper was the original physical document. We have a sworn notarized affidavit stating that the original will was severely water damaged in a basement flood 6 months ago. The document presented today is a legally authorized retraced copy of that destroyed original executed by a notary public to preserve the late father's wishes. The ink is new because the copy is new." A heavy murmur washed over the packed courtroom as the lead lawyer for Omnicorp delivered his desperate, incredibly slick pivot. He proudly slapped a freshly stamped affidavit onto the judge's bench, claiming a notary public had legally authorized the tracing of the supposedly water-damaged original document. Beatrice let out a highly theatrical sigh of relief from the plaintiff's table, pressing her lace handkerchief against her chest. Serena shot me a triumphant, vicious smirk from the front row of the gallery. They honestly thought they had found the perfect legal loophole to completely explain away the synthetic ink. Judge Morrison frowned deeply, adjusting his reading glasses as he scrutinized the newly submitted affidavit. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting to see if this massive corporate entity would actually get away with such a blatant manipulation of the judicial system. My lead attorney did not panic. He simply looked back at me and gave a sharp, confident nod. He turned his attention back to the towering wooden bench and formally requested permission to call a final rebuttal witness to directly address the authenticity of the notary's affidavit. Judge Morrison granted the request immediately. My attorney did not call another forensic scientist or a handwriting expert to the wooden podium. He called me. I stood up from the defense table, smoothing the lapels of my tailored black suit. I walked with absolute unwavering purpose across the silent courtroom floor. I raised my right hand, placed my left hand firmly on the leather-bound Bible, and swore a solemn oath to tell the complete and absolute truth. As I took my seat in the witness stand, I did not look at the jury or the intimidating judge. I locked my eyes directly onto my mother. The smug, victorious expression on Beatrice's face instantly faltered. She shifted uncomfortably in her heavy wooden chair, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the table tightly. My attorney approached the stand holding a sleek digital tablet. He formally requested permission to connect my device directly to the courtroom's primary evidence projector. The judge allowed it without hesitation. I plugged the encrypted cable into my device. The massive screen hanging in the center of the room flickered to life. I did not intend to argue about water-damaged basement floods or retrace signatures. I was going to completely dismantle their entire false narrative using their own digital footprint. Can you please explain to the court what we are currently looking at on the screen, Zoya? My attorney asked, his voice echoing loudly. You are looking at a series of highly encrypted email exchanges. I stated clearly into the microphone, ensuring every single person in the gallery heard my words. These communications occurred exactly 3 weeks ago between Beatrice, the senior legal partners at Omnicorp Global, and a junior executive working inside my own cyber intelligence firm. His name is Julian, and he was secretly employed as a corporate spy. I tapped the screen, magnifying a specific, undeniably clear email thread. When my team discovered the security breach, we did not fire Julian. We turned him into a double agent. We actively monitored every single digital interaction he had with the prosecution. This specific email, sent directly from Beatrice's private account, explicitly authorizes a wire transfer of $50,000 to an underground forgery specialist located in Chicago. The attached message clearly outlines her precise request to manufacture a fake 30-year-old will using a stolen high-resolution scan of my late father's signature. The courtroom erupted into absolute pandemonium. The lead Omnicorp lawyer jumped out of his chair so fast it tipped over backwards, crashing loudly against the wooden railing. He screamed a frantic string of panicked objections, desperately claiming the emails were fabricated and demanding the evidence be immediately stricken from the official record. Judge Morrison slammed his heavy wooden gavel down repeatedly, his face turning a furious, terrifying shade of crimson. "Overruled!" The judge roared, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Sit down immediately, counselor, or I will have federal marshals throw you in a holding cell." The judge turned his fierce, unyielding glare directly toward Beatrice, who was now hyperventilating and visibly shaking. This court has zero tolerance for blatant perjury, manufactured evidence, and malicious fraud. You have completely mocked the integrity of the judicial system. Judge Morrison did not hesitate for another second. He officially threw the entire case out with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. He formally held Beatrice in direct contempt of court and ordered the federal marshals standing in the back of the room to launch an immediate, comprehensive criminal investigation into Omnicorp Global for orchestrating a massive conspiracy to commit fraud. The crushing weight of total defeat finally crashed down on the prosecution table. The powerful corporate giant had officially lost. The federal marshals immediately moved forward, securing the courtroom exits as the panicked investors and media reporters frantically typed on their phones. I calmly stepped down from the witness stand, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of absolute vindication. As the gallery began to clear out, the sleek Omnicorp lawyers frantically packed their expensive leather briefcases. They did not offer Beatrice a single word of comfort. The late attorney, his face pale with the terrifying realization of his impending federal indictment, turned sharply toward my mother and Serena. He coldly informed them that his prestigious law firm was dropping them as clients effective immediately. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a thick, itemized legal invoice, and slammed it aggressively onto the table right in front of Serena's trembling hands. "You lied to us about the digital trail," the lawyer hissed, his eyes filled with pure venom. "You owe our firm $500,000 in legal fees for fronting this disastrous trial. We demand full repayment by Friday afternoon, or we will seize your suburban mansion." You have absolutely nowhere left to hide your worthless, pathetic lies anymore. Consider yourselves entirely ruined. The heavy wooden doors of the federal courtroom swung shut behind the furious Omnicorp attorneys, leaving my mother and sister standing completely alone in the massive echoing chamber. Beatrice slowly sank into the nearest wooden chair, her face buried in her trembling hands as the terrifying reality of her complete financial annihilation finally settled in. Serena remained completely frozen in place. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the edge of the defendant's table so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white. She had spent her entire adult life relying exclusively on the wealth of other people to shield her from the brutal consequences of her own malicious actions. Now her fraudulent husband was securely locked inside a federal holding cell. Her mother was facing a massive criminal investigation, and a powerful team of ruthless corporate sharks had just placed a $500,000 target directly on her back. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I simply turned around, flanked by my victorious legal team, and walked out of the courthouse with my head held incredibly high. 72 hours later, the crushing weight of the real world came crashing down on the family's undisputed golden child. The ruthless attorneys at Omnicorp did not waste a single second waiting for an apology. When Friday afternoon arrived without a massive wire transfer, they immediately executed their vicious legal threat. A highly professional process server showed up at Serena's sprawling suburban estate, aggressively taping a brightly colored foreclosure notice directly onto her custom mahogany front door. Her luxury sports utility vehicle had already been quietly repossessed in the dark middle of the night. Her elite credit cards were entirely frozen, declining loudly at the local grocery store. The wealthy women at her exclusive country club immediately stopped answering her desperate, sobbing phone calls, completely distancing themselves from the highly publicized scandal. Serena was rapidly drowning in a terrifying ocean of debt, and she had absolutely no life rafts left to grab. In a state of pure, unadulterated desperation, she finally did the one thing she aggressively swore she would never do. She came crawling back to the sister she had spent decades trying to destroy. She had mocked my technical career relentlessly throughout our entire childhood, boasting about marrying an elite white man with immense capital, yet here she was completely penniless. My executive assistant buzzed my private office line just before noon on Monday morning. She informed me that a highly distressed woman was standing in our sleek lobby, hysterically begging for just 5 minutes of my time. I authorized the security desk to send my sister up to the top floor. When the private glass elevator doors opened, I barely recognized the broken woman stepping into my pristine corporate suite. Serena was not wearing her signature designer silk dresses or her expensive diamond jewelry. She wore a pair of oversized sweatpants and a baggy gray sweater, her eyes severely bloodshot and visibly swollen from days of relentless crying. She slowly walked toward my massive glass desk, completely abandoning the arrogant superior posture she had happily weaponized against me since our childhood. Serena violently collapsed into the modern guest chair sitting opposite my desk, burying her face in her hands as loud, dramatic sobs wrecked her shaking body. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer a glass of water. I simply leaned back in my premium leather chair, folding my hands together, and waited patiently for her to speak, letting her sit in the uncomfortable, heavy silence she truly deserved. "They are taking absolutely everything from me, Zoya," Serena cried, her voice cracking with raw, pathetic desperation as she wiped her running nose. "The corporate lawyers are seizing my beautiful house. Preston left me with mountains of hidden financial debt I cannot possibly pay. The legal fees are completely overwhelming and the banks are absolutely merciless. I am going to be thrown out onto the street by the end of the week. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. You have to help me right now. You are a billionaire now. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. Please, I am begging you to just buy my house from the bank to stop the foreclosure. You can easily pay off the remaining mortgage, and I can just pay you a small monthly rent to stay there until I get back on my feet. I will do whatever you want me to do. We are still blood. You cannot let your own sister become completely homeless." I listened to her desperate, sobbing plea without feeling a single ounce of pity. I looked at the exact same woman who had actively tried to lock our grandmother in a psychiatric ward just to steal a cosmetic empire. I thought about all the years she had viciously mocked my career, calling me a pathetic loser, while spending money that was never truly hers. I remembered the cruel laughter she shared with Preston when they thought they had successfully destroyed my reputation during the trial. She never loved me. She only loved the money I could provide. I slowly opened my top desk drawer and pulled out a freshly stamped thick legal folder. I tossed it onto the glass desk right in front of her tear-stained face. The loud slap of the heavy paper against the glass surface made her flinch backward in pure, unadulterated terror. "You really think I would ever act as your personal landlord, Serena?" I asked, a cold, highly satisfied smile spreading across my face as I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk and staring directly into her terrified, wide-open eyes. "I already bought your massive debt from the bank yesterday afternoon. You have exactly 48 hours to finally pack your bags and completely vacate my newly acquired suburban property before I call the local police to forcibly remove you for criminal trespassing. Goodbye, Serena." The heavy glass doors slid shut, separating me from Serena's hysterical sobbing as security escorted her out of my corporate lobby. I took a deep breath, but my smartwatch immediately vibrated against my wrist, signaling a high-priority alert from my private surveillance network. While Serena was begging for her mansion, Beatrice was making a much more dangerous, desperate move across town. Warrants for my mother's arrest had officially been issued for perjury and charity embezzlement. With her bank accounts frozen and her high society friends abandoning her, Beatrice was completely out of options. But she remembered one final hidden lifeline. Decades ago, long before the massive banking infrastructure was established, Big Mama Ruby kept a secret stash of untraceable vintage jewelry hidden beneath the floorboards of her original estate study. It was an emergency fund of flawless diamonds and raw gold. Beatrice thought she was the only person who knew about it. She thought she could sneak into the estate under the cover of darkness, steal the jewels, and buy a one-way ticket out of the country before the federal marshals kicked down her door. She was entirely wrong. The rain was pouring heavily when Beatrice bypassed the outer gate of Ruby's estate, using an old landscaping entrance she remembered from her childhood. My security team watched her every single move through our infrared cameras, relaying her exact coordinates directly to my tablet. I did not call the police to intercept her. I wanted to handle this final confrontation personally. I drove straight to the estate, slipping into the dark study through the interior hallway. Big Mama Ruby was already waiting for me there, sitting quietly in her wheelchair in the pitch-black room. We did not speak. We simply waited in the suffocating silence, listening to the frantic, muffled sounds of a desperate woman trying to break into her own mother's home. The heavy oak door of the study creaked open slowly. A narrow beam of light from a small flashlight pierced the darkness, sweeping frantically across the antique bookshelves and the Persian rug. Beatrice crept into the room, her hair soaking wet from the storm outside. She was wearing a dark trench coat, a stark contrast to her usual vibrant designer dresses. She dropped to her knees near the heavy mahogany desk, her breathing ragged and loud in the quiet space. She pulled a small crowbar from her coat pocket and began aggressively prying at the loose wooden floorboard she remembered from 30 years ago. The wood splintered with a sharp crack. She shoved her hands into the dark cavity, frantically searching for the velvet bags of diamonds that would fund her cowardly escape. Her fingers grasped nothing but empty air. I reached over and flicked the brass switch on the desk lamp. Warm, bright light instantly flooded the study, illuminating the pathetic sight of my mother kneeling on the floor covered in dust and wood splinters. Beatrice let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her flashlight as she scrambled backward against the bookshelves. "Looking for these, Beatrice?" Big Mama Ruby asked, her voice echoing with a profound, heavy disappointment. Ruby held up a heavy velvet pouch, the diamonds clinking softly together. "I moved them 20 years ago. I always knew your greed would eventually lead you to the bottom of the barrel, but watching you crawl on the floor like a common thief in my home is a tragedy I never wanted to witness." Beatrice stared at us, her chest heaving violently. The polished, elite socialite persona completely dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, broken woman cornered by her own malicious actions. She looked at the velvet bag in Ruby's hands, and then she looked at me standing tall beside the wheelchair. The absolute finality of her situation finally crushed her spirit. Beatrice buried her face in her dirty hands and began to weep. It was not the calculated, theatrical crying she used in the courtroom. It was the ugly, agonizing wail of a person whose entire fraudulent existence had just violently collapsed. "I had to do it," Beatrice sobbed, rocking back and forth on the damaged floorboards. "I had to maintain the image. You do not understand what it was like growing up in this house, knowing I was just an illegitimate mistake. I was surrounded by excellence, by purity, and I was just an affair baby. I felt like a complete fraud every single day of my life. I had to marry into the Worthington family. I had to force Serena to be perfect. I had to prove that I belonged at the top of society." She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streams. "And then you came along, Zoya, the perfect, brilliant, legitimate heir to everything. You were effortless. You did not even care about the social status I killed myself to maintain. I hated you for it. I projected all of my deep, rotting insecurities directly onto you because punishing you was the only thing that made me feel powerful. I tried to break you so I could finally feel whole. Your insecurities do not excuse decades of systemic abuse and financial theft," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You chose to be cruel. You chose to align with a racist criminal just to keep your country club membership. You tried to lock the woman who raised you in a psychiatric ward for a paycheck." I unbuttoned my blazer, reached into the interior pocket, and pulled out a thick, legally binding document printed on heavy cardstock. I dropped the paperwork directly onto the floor right between Beatrice's trembling knees. I tossed a silver pen down next to it. "This is your final judgment, Beatrice," I declared, staring down at her pathetic, shivering form. "I have drafted a comprehensive notarized confession detailing every single financial crime, elder abuse attempt, and forgery conspiracy you and Serena committed. I offer you a final, devastating ultimatum right now. Sign that document right now," I commanded, my voice echoing coldly in the dimly lit study. "If you put your signature on that dotted line, I will not hand this thick folder of undeniable evidence over to the district attorney. You will both manage to avoid a mandatory federal prison sentence for orchestrating a massive criminal conspiracy. But in exchange for your absolute freedom, you walk away with absolutely zero. You surrender every single claim to this family estate. You forfeit your luxury cars, your suburban mansions, and your hidden trust funds. You leave this property tonight with nothing but the wet clothes on your back." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the study swung completely open. Two of my muscular private security contractors marched into the room, tightly gripping the arms of a soaking wet, highly agitated woman. It was Serena. She had been waiting in a discreet getaway vehicle parked just outside the estate gates, hoping her mother would return with a bag full of untraceable diamonds. When Beatrice failed to emerge, Serena foolishly tried to sneak onto the grounds, walking right into my sophisticated surveillance trap. The guards released my sister, letting her stumble awkwardly onto the antique Persian rug. Serena looked down at our mother, who was still kneeling pathetically on the damaged floorboards in her ruined trench coat. Serena then looked at the heavy cardstock confession lying right next to the pen. "You cannot do this to us!" Serena shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic as she scrambled to her feet. "You cannot force us to sign away our entire lives. I will not do it. I will call the police right now and tell them you are holding us hostage and trying to extort us. I will tell the press you are a psychopath." I did not even blink at her pathetic, empty threats. "You do not have a single dollar left to pay a public relations firm, Serena," I replied, stepping closer to my hysterical sister. "Your husband is currently sitting inside a federal holding cell, crying like a baby, and giving the Federal Bureau of Investigation a complete detailed roadmap of your entire fraudulent operation. Those ruthless corporate lawyers are legally seizing your massive suburban estate tomorrow morning. You have absolutely no leverage left. If you do not sign that confession right now, I will personally drive to the local police precinct and hand the lead detective the high-resolution video of you physically forcing our grandmother to sign those fake medical documents. You will be wearing an orange jumpsuit by sunrise. Serena stared at me, her chest heaving violently as the crushing reality of her inescapable situation finally sank in. She turned her desperate, pleading eyes toward our mother, desperately hoping Beatrice would magically summon a brilliant legal loophole to save them from total destruction. But Beatrice was completely broken. The arrogant, status-obsessed socialite who had terrorized me for my entire life was entirely gone. She slowly reached out with a trembling, dirt-covered hand and picked up the cold silver pen from the wooden floor. She knew I was not bluffing. She knew her elite country club friends would never visit her in a federal penitentiary. "Do not sign it, Mom," Serena begged, dropping to her knees and grabbing her mother's shaking shoulders. "If you sign that paper, we will have absolutely nothing left. We will be completely homeless." "We already have nothing left, Serena," Beatrice whispered, her voice completely hollow and devoid of all hope. "We lost everything the moment we underestimated her." Beatrice pressed the silver pen against the thick cardstock. Her hand shook violently as she scrawled her signature at the very bottom of the comprehensive confession, legally surrendering every single asset, property, and trust fund she had spent her entire life ruthlessly hoarding. She dropped the pen onto the floor and buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably into the dark carpet. Serena looked at the signed document in absolute horror. She was entirely out of options. She slowly picked up the silver pen, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely grip the metal barrel. With a sharp, agonizing gasp of total defeat, my sister signed her name right, next to our mother's signature, officially signing away her entire privileged existence. I calmly leaned down and retrieved the signed confession, inspecting the wet ink to ensure both signatures were perfectly legible. I tucked the heavy document safely into my interior blazer pocket. They had finally surrendered. They had completely capitulated to the very daughter they had relentlessly mocked and abused for decades. Big Mama Ruby watched the entire interaction from her wheelchair, her sharp eyes filled with a deep, resolute sense of final justice. Beatrice slowly lifted her tear-stained face from her dirty hands. "We signed your horrible contract," she choked out, her voice raspy and weak. "We gave you absolutely everything you wanted. We are completely destitute. How are we supposed to survive now? How are we supposed to eat or put a roof over our heads without any money?" I looked down at the two miserable women kneeling on the floor. I reached into my other coat pocket and pulled out two neatly folded standard white sheets of paper. I dropped them onto the floor right where the legal confession had been just moments ago. Serena and Beatrice stared at the plain white papers in total confusion. They slowly reached out and unfolded the documents. They were not bank checks. They were not temporary housing vouchers. They were standard entry-level employment applications for minimum wage cashier positions at one of the local retail beauty supply stores that Big Mama Ruby's corporation proudly owned. "Independence is earned," I said, my voice echoing with absolute unwavering finality. "You will start working on Monday morning. You will fold boxes, you will sweep floors, and you will finally learn the true value of a hard-earned dollar. Do not be late." The swift and brutal wheels of justice did not stop turning after that fateful night in the damaged study. Over the next 6 months, the grand illusion of the Worthington and Vance family superiority systematically dismantled itself in the most public, humiliating ways imaginable. Preston was the very first to face his permanent reality. He stood in a federal courtroom completely stripped of his tailored Italian suits and his arrogant smirk, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The federal judge did not show him a single ounce of mercy. Because I had handed the prosecutors a flawless digital trail of his offshore money laundering and his connections to a highly violent international crime syndicate. Preston was swiftly sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There was no comfortable country club prison waiting for him. There were no elite golf buddies willing to bail him out or bribe the warden. As the heavy wooden gavel slammed down, Preston finally understood that his old money-white privilege had completely evaporated. He was just another criminal locked inside a tiny concrete cage, forced to trade his luxurious life for a stiff cot and a cold stainless steel toilet. Serena faced a distinctly different kind of prison. She had loudly scoffed at the job application I dropped on the floor, but extreme hunger and a looming eviction notice quickly shattered her stubborn pride. My former golden child sister, who once threw furious tantrums if her designer shoes got a minor scuff on them, was now working the late-night drive-through window at a fast food franchise. I made absolutely sure it was a location directly along the main route her former high society friends took after their lavish charity galas. She had to wear a cheap, itchy polyester uniform and a greasy plastic visor that completely flattened her expensive hair extensions. Every night, Serena had to hand heavy, greasy paper bags of French fries through a sliding window to the exact same wealthy women she used to drink expensive champagne with. They did not even bother to look her in the eye or leave a tip. They simply rolled up their tinted windows and drove away, leaving Serena to choke on the harsh exhaust fumes of the luxury vehicles she used to proudly own. She finally learned what it felt like to be entirely invisible. My mother experienced the most poetic justice of all. Beatrice avoided federal prison for the charity embezzlement only because she signed the confession and agreed to a brutal, uncompromising financial restitution plan. I gave her the exact role she truly deserved. The woman who used to proudly sit at the head of the Jack and Jill Society Board was now the primary custodial worker for a bustling retail shop in downtown Atlanta. Beatrice spent her long days wearing heavy rubber gloves, aggressively scrubbing deep scuff marks off the linoleum floors, and wiping down public restrooms. Every penny she earned above the legal poverty line was garnished by the state to slowly pay back the hundreds of thousands of dollars she stole from underprivileged youth. The manicured hands she used to proudly display her pearls were now raw, cracked, and blistered from harsh industrial cleaning chemicals. She traded her emerald silk dresses for a stained gray utility apron. Independence was a remarkably bitter pill to swallow, but she was forced to choke it down every single day. While they wallowed in the harsh consequences of their malicious greed, I elevated my own life to unprecedented heights. I stood on the expansive glass balcony of my newly purchased commercial skyscraper, the crisp evening wind whipping fiercely through my hair as I looked down at the glittering skyline of the city. Big Mama Ruby sat peacefully beside me in her sleek motorized wheelchair. She was wrapped in a luxurious cashmere shawl, sipping a warm cup of herbal tea. The heavy burden of betrayal had completely lifted from her shoulders. We had successfully protected her billion-dollar cosmetic empire, completely purging the toxic parasites from our bloodline. Our shared triumph was a testament to the undeniable power of setting uncompromising boundaries against people who seek to exploit your generosity. "You did incredibly well, Zoya," Ruby said quietly, looking out at the endless sea of bright city lights stretching across the horizon. "You taught me that true family is not defined by who shares your blood or your last name. True family is defined by who bravely stands between you and the raging fire when the rest of the world tries to burn you down. You protected my legacy when I was too weak to fight." I smiled warmly, resting my hand gently on her shoulder. Before I could reply to her profound wisdom, my encrypted corporate tablet buzzed sharply inside my tailored blazer pocket. I pulled the sleek device out and tapped the glowing screen. It was a high-priority, heavily encrypted email forwarded directly from my lead crisis director. Another arrogant, wealthy elite was actively attempting a hostile, leveraged takeover of a highly vulnerable, Black-owned technology startup in Chicago. The attached financial data reeked of aggressive corporate sabotage, vicious blackmail, and blatant offshore fraud. I quickly reviewed the initial risk assessment, noting the aggressive tactics the rival firm was employing to intimidate the young founders. I locked the digital screen and slipped the tablet securely back into my pocket. A slow, highly dangerous smile spread across my face as I looked back out over the sprawling city. The ruthless predators of the corporate world honestly thought they were invincible, hiding behind their expensive suits and prestigious titles. But they had not met me yet. I was completely ready for my next mission. I turned away from the view of the illuminated city and walked back inside my sprawling office, the sharp clicking of my heels echoing with absolute purpose. Justice was not just a singular event. It was a lifelong calling that I would always gladly answer. I settled into the plush leather chair behind my massive glass desk, letting the profound silence of my secure corporate suite wash over me completely. The brutal war was officially over, and the heavy dust had finally settled across the battlefield. Big Mama Ruby was no longer confined to a miserable wheelchair, pretending to lose her brilliant mind just to survive her own daughter's toxic greed. She was currently flourishing in her custom-designed, state-of-the-art penthouse suite, surrounded by dedicated, highly paid private nurses who treated her like absolute royalty. She spent her long, peaceful days painting vibrant canvases, reading classic literature, and advising me on massive corporate acquisitions. The billion-dollar cosmetic empire she built from the ground up with her own two hands was completely impenetrable now. We had successfully locked the core patents behind a multi-layered digital fortress that no greedy corporate conglomerate or desperate socialite could ever hope to breach. I had completely redefined what it meant to be a protector in this family. I was not just a temporary shield against immediate outside threats. I was the permanent, unyielding barrier that kept the rotting sickness from within from destroying our legacy. For 33 agonizing years, I allowed my mother and sister to treat me like a completely disposable stepping stone. I let them aggressively convince me that because I did not care about high society galas, expensive designer dresses, or marrying into old money, I was somehow fundamentally flawed. They ruthlessly weaponized my introverted nature and my deep passion for technology, painting me as the weird, incompetent scapegoat so they could comfortably ignore their own glaring inadequacies. Beatrice desperately needed someone to look down on, so she could feel superior about her fabricated high-class identity. Serena desperately needed a constant failure of a sister to make her disastrous, financially abusive marriage look like a beautiful fairy tale success. They required my perceived weakness to sustain their grand illusion of untouchable strength. But the absolute truth is that I was never weak. I was simply observing their mistakes, learning their vulnerabilities, and quietly accumulating the exact type of immense power that cannot be bought at a flashy country club charity auction. Setting hard, uncompromising boundaries with your own flesh and blood is arguably the most agonizing, terrifying process a person can ever endure. Society constantly conditions us to firmly believe that family is an unbreakable sacred bond, and that we must endlessly forgive toxic behavior simply because we share the exact same DNA. That is a highly dangerous, emotionally manipulative lie designed specifically to keep victims securely chained to their abusers. Walking away from my mother and sister and actively participating in their complete financial ruin was not an act of bitter malice. It was the ultimate, absolutely necessary form of radical self-care. I had to completely sever the infected, rotting limbs to save the rest of the healthy body. You cannot possibly heal in the exact same toxic environment that continuously makes you sick. You cannot build a peaceful, prosperous future if you constantly allow greedy, deeply insecure people to drag you back into their chaotic, dramatic dysfunction. I looked at the glowing computer monitors surrounding my wide desk, watching the real-time encrypted data streams of my thriving cyber intelligence firm. My business was rapidly expanding globally, taking on massive new security contracts to aggressively protect vulnerable companies from the exact same predatory tactics Omnicorp had arrogantly tried to use against us. I was utilizing my immense personal wealth and my unparalleled digital expertise to build a massive protective shield around minority-owned businesses, ensuring that no other hardworking founder would ever have their life's work stolen by ruthless corporate sharks or treacherous family members. The quiet girl they once viciously mocked for fixing broken laptops in a dark, damp basement was now directly dictating the financial security of international markets. I had taken the heavy, suffocating stones of their relentless criticism and utilized them to meticulously build an absolutely unassailable, towering empire. The absolute unshakable peace I currently felt in my heart was well worth every single brutal battle, every shredded bank document, and every frozen offshore account. I had proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that I possess the fierce intelligence, the unyielding determination, and the sheer strategic brilliance to outmaneuver anyone who dared to threaten my family's deeply cherished legacy. Nobody would ever mistake my profound silence for weakness ever again. I was the absolute master of my own beautiful, perfectly secured destiny. I want to take a serious moment to speak directly to anyone watching this who is currently suffocating under the crushing weight of a highly toxic family dynamic. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family members who consistently underestimated your true worth? How did you finally break free from their manipulation and take your power back? I want to read your inspiring stories, so please let me know in the comments below. Do not ever let anyone convince you that protecting your personal peace makes you a terrible villain. You have every legal and moral right to completely distance yourself from people who only value you for exactly what they can forcefully extract from you. If this story gave you the courage to bravely stand up to toxic family dynamics and reclaim your own beautiful life, hit that like and subscribe button. Your support helps build a strong community of independent individuals who refuse to be victims. We must continuously remind ourselves that setting proper boundaries is an act of profound courage and self-respect, paving the way for a much brighter, healthier tomorrow, where genuine love is not transactional. We are entirely worthy of genuine happiness that is completely detached from familial guilt, shame, or manipulation. Keep building your incredible empires and never look back at the darkness you bravely escaped. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply letting them watch you win.